Hello again, Ecotopians, for what may be almost the last time. Today, since we're finishing the class, we've talked a lot about what Ecotopia is all about, what redwoods are, what ecosystems are, and how they work, and a fair amount of the past and the current situation of Ecotopia. So this week, I thought, since we are doing a review, that we would also take a look ahead, which is a little bit tricky, of course, because who can predict the future? So what I would do is first acknowledge that this is highly speculative material, and I have enjoyed myself a little bit, maybe too much, in making this presentation, and I would suggest that you kick back, relax, enjoy the show, go get a soda pop or anything, but not an alcoholic beverage, because I don't think you're allowed to drink or smoke pot in school. But wait a minute, this is an online course. You can't. Is that what you guys have been doing this whole semester? Just kidding. Anyway, don't pay close attention, but remember, these are mostly my opinions, although I am throwing some facts to try to support my opinions. Anyway, here's my take on what the future depends upon in Ecotopia. It depends on what people do, and it depends on what nature does. Okay, that's my approach. Let's kind of look at what people do and look at what nature is doing in Ecotopia. So, regarding what people do, I broke it up into three different scenarios, which are as follows. The first scenario is business as usual, no big surprises. We look at the trends that have come from the past, and we just project them into the future, without adding any big surprises. The second scenario is apocalypse, everything going to hell, and there's various ways that could happen, many that I probably haven't even foreseen, but I wanted to develop some maybe possible scenarios for that. And thirdly, something in between the business as usual and apocalyptic scenarios. So I will be developing each of this through this lecture, beginning with business as usual. Okay, let's do that first. So business as usual. Well, here's a trend. Let's look at number of people, because really when you think about it, population growth, population size is really important to human society. And over the last, let's see, what do we have here? 1790 to 2000 in the United States, population has gone from just less than 10 million people to over, I think we're up to 300 million people now, over 300 million. Those are huge numbers. And if we project that into the future, we got a lot of people in the United States. Now, I looked into this a little bit, and I found out that actually the population growth rate in the United States really is, actually the reproductive rate is less than replacement rate. We're at around ZPG, zero population growth, due to new births. The growth in population size currently in the United States is mostly due to immigration. We have a lot of people coming into the United States, and that increases our population size. What does that mean to Ecotopia? I have no idea. But since, let's see, Humboldt County is in Ecotopia, I thought I'd take a closer look at our county. This is the best graph I could find on short notice, that only goes from 1960 to 2000. And you see a growth curve. You have to be a little bit careful interpreting this. Actually, what was really interesting to me is that through the 60s and the 70s, which was really the heyday of the timber industry, the greatest production of timber from Humboldt County was during this time. And there wasn't any population growth during that time. In fact, population went down a little bit from 1960 to 1970. And it's gone up since then, even despite the collapse, if you will, of the timber production, redwood timber production. So why is population going up when apparently our timber industry went into the tank? I don't know. I am going to speculate. Please just throw this out as speculation if you want to. I think it might have to do with marijuana production because that's brought in a lot of revenue, made the county relatively prosperous, that may have attracted people. I would predict, well, I'll save that prediction for later, marijuana legalization. We'll talk about that. Anyway, is this a troubling trend, increase in population? Not to me. It's not so great as in many other parts of the world. So locally, maybe not a problem. But then the question is, do things that affect people in other parts of the world, like India and China, that have huge population growth, affect us? Really great question. One other thing that has happened, a trend, if you will, from the past, is the passage of the Northwest Forest Plan, which we discussed last week. So remember, I'm going to review for you elements of the Northwest Forest Plan. It's been about 20 years. It directed federal agencies to include in their management plans the following items. So federal agencies, which the U.S. government owns a lot of land in our backyard. The National Forest, the Bureau of Land Management owns other land, the national parks. So they must include in their management plans these items. Long-term health of forest, wildlife, and waterways. They need to focus on scientifically sound, ecologically credible, and legally responsible strategies and implementation of their plans, and to produce a predictable and sustainable level of forest products. So it's been 20 years, and assuming no change in the Northwest Forest Plan, which is a huge assumption, but we're just projecting these trends, then what can we expect? Well, we can expect a recovery of endangered species. For instance, the spotted owl, or the marbled murrelet, or the coho salmon, as entire watersheds recover from the basically environmental devastation of the 19th or the 20th century. By the way, these are just 3 of the endangered species, but there are many endangered species in Ecotopia, and presumably any of those that require land on national federally owned land should recover according to the Northwest Forest Plan. And I would say there are some problems with the spotted owl. I do see some promise with salmon. It's slow, but there may be recovery. There's signs for hope. Usually I don't apologize for nasty slides, but I have to apologize for this one. What this says is total redwood forests. So this is shows land ownership of redwood forests, and I got this from a commercial website because I couldn't find one anywhere else. And so it may not be credible, but let's just assume it's at least ballpark accurate. What it says is that more than a quarter of all redwood forests are publicly owned. So 450,000 acres in parks, monuments, and publicly owned lands such as national parks, state parks, and so forth. And then a whole bunch of it is commercially owned. So that would be, for instance, the green diamond land that's using land to produce redwood timber. And this says that the over 1 million acres, so maybe 3/5, let's see, 1, 2, 4, 5, yeah, 3/5 of the privately owned lands is certified, third-party certified. It's certified as being sustainably produced. What does that mean? That's a whole other subject. But essentially, they're just not taking all and leaving nothing and not doing anything to bring the wood back. So now, there's different ways to look at this. On the one hand, you might think that the entire redwood forest should have been old growth, never should have been touched, and it's a travesty that so much of it is being used for timber production. On the other hand, you could say, well, actually, all this land was created for humans to use, and so it should all be in use. And frankly, there are many countries in the world that have that attitude and are completely clear-cutting their forests with absolutely no protection at all for any of it. So in the United States, it looks like we're setting aside more than a quarter, at least, of the redwoods. So maybe not so good, certainly not so bad. It looks like a compromise position. And I just think that's really interesting. So what we should see, remember, much of this has already been logged and is early successional. But with the Northwest Forest Plan, it should continue to grow and get older and acquire old growth characteristics, good for those species that require that. Okay, so I find that positive. And lastly, I think it's important to say something about what's going on with Native Americans. So this year, 2014, the Wiyats held a world renewal ceremony on Tuluwat Island. Now, the last time they held this ceremony, a bunch of guys showed up on that land and slaughtered practically everyone on the island. And probably nothing ever would have gotten out into the world if Bret Hart hadn't wrote an article about it in San Francisco and it got some attention. So that was the situation then, the sort of situation for Native Americans not much longer than 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And now today they are safe enough to go back to Tuluwat Island, which has been given in part back to them by the city of Eureka, and to hold this world renewal ceremony without fear of being slaughtered. So that's a positive trend, and so I would hope that if this trend continues, what we will see is that the Native Americans in our area will continue to be safe and to recover as much of what they can of what has been lost, and also to navigate the trickiness of living in two cultures at the same time, which I can't imagine the challenges of doing that. But anyway, that would be my prediction for the future, that this trend would continue, that Native Americans would continue to be safe and thrive and grow. So moving away, I'm starting to move away now from the business as usual scenario. But before doing that, I wanted to mention that in my experience, people tend to fall into two different camps. One camp I call technological optimism. People who believe that, yeah, there will be problems, but we'll figure out a way, especially a technological way, to get around it. So, for instance, we have the problem with fossil fuel use and climate change. Well, we'll develop new kinds of solar alternative energy that we can fix the problem technologically. So the other side of that spectrum are the technological pessimists. Here's an example of a big technology stuff, and this guy over here saying the end of times is nigh. He's a pessimist. Technological pessimists believe that anything humans do screws up the environment, and any attempt we make to fix it makes it even worse. We should just leave it alone and stop developing new technology. Two ends of the extreme. As I get older, well, first of all, I just wanted to say personally, so you'll understand my point of view in discussing this, I tend to be a technological pessimist. However, I've been wrong so many times on my predictions that I stopped making doom and gloom apocalyptic predictions, because I've been wrong before. I never thought I would live to be 30. I thought there was going to be a world war, but it didn't happen. I thought DDT was going to poison every species. That didn't happen. So it's not that I don't believe there's not problems with technology, but I've moderated my view. But I just wanted to point out these two ends of the spectrum to encourage you to think about your own point of view. Are you a technological positivist or a negativist? And do you have an open mind about that, which I hope you do, or don't you? And if you don't have an open mind about it, I would encourage you to think about that and consider consider opening your mind to other approaches. It's part of critical thinking, seeing the other side of the view. Anyway, I am now about to go into I feel like I've done due diligence in talking about the positive side of business as usual, and now I will indulge myself in talking about technological pessimism and apocalypse. So we're going to talk about apocalypse now. How would apocalypse come on us? And I'm not going to invoke asteroids or, let's see, the religious god thing coming down, the seven horsemen or whatever, but actual things that could happen because they've happened before. Okay, first, Let's just take a look at world population size. This is world population size, not American, not Humboldt County. And this goes from 1800 to, let's see, the actual numbers stop about now, 2014. Okay, so black was estimated from the past before they had good numbers. Blue is measured better, and these multiple colors are predictions of the future. Here's your business as usual, but most of the predictions see world population leveling off at about 10 billion. Why is that? It's fascinating. You should look into world population size and growth rates. Growth, population growth is not equal everywhere in the world. Some places, like in the United States and in most of the developed world, the industrial world, population has kind of leveled off. Some places still have big rises. Some places have slight population growth rates, but their population is so huge that a small growth rate means a huge increase in numbers. And by that I'm talking about China and India. Most of the world's population lives in Asia and Oceania, Southeast Asia, and they have a lot of people. And so small growth rates above replacement rate means big increases in numbers. Anyway, what does that mean to us? And here's some predictions. Well, here's a real kind of interesting one that says the population is going to go down, maybe even crash. Here's one that says it's going to level off pretty quickly and we can live at 10 billion. They're based on different assumptions. I'm not totally familiar with the assumptions, but I will look at some things that might cause this kind of scenario. Okay, for instance, war. Now, I'm a little bit negative on that. I don't think humans will ever achieve a completely peaceful way of being. I would hope they do, but I see no evidence of that. What I do see is that we did not have a world war back in, when it was Russia against the West. However, we still have a lot of those nuclear weapons, and it's not to say that it couldn't happen, but we know when it does happen, it's quite devastating. It just shuts down society as a whole. Terrible things happen. So war, war is terrible. We know that. Recession, particularly worldwide recession, would have a huge effect on people here. This is just a newspaper from the great stock market crash of 1929. Billions lost, a new stock crash, and we have just come through, I'm not sure we've left, another great recession, pretty bad economic times. And it's important to know that the world economies are connected, so that when the economy of one nation, one important nation, has trouble, so do all the rest to varying degrees as an interconnected world, interconnected economy. Plague. Maybe you laugh. What are you talking about, plague? Don't we have modern medicines? Yes and no. This is a picture from the 1917-ish Spanish influenza that swept the world. And this is a pretty fascinating plague if you get into it. It's viral, and so we do not have any medicines that can prevent viral infections. So these kind of things are what the people who study disease are most concerned about, that a new virus similar to the Spanish influenza virus could evolve and start killing people and spread from people to people. I pay close attention to reports like MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or SARS, I forget what that stands for, Sudden Acute Respiratory System, or just, I can't remember what it was. I'm sure it's going to show up right here. Anyway, these things maybe if they evolve now, when we're between 7 and 10 billion people, could have an even greater devastating effect on the human population than they did 100 years ago, when we didn't have intercontinental jumbo jets. and so forth. And we did have 10 billion people, many of whom are living in quite close to poverty or in poverty. So this is something very concerning, the possibility of plagues. And honestly, I think our best friends in the whole world are the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control, which is a United States organization that are constantly looking for new outbreaks, trying to understand them and develop vaccines or solutions to them as soon as possible, because we, in my personal opinion, are very vulnerable to this sort of thing happening again. And lastly, environmental catastrophe. It's happened before in the United States. The Dust Bowl. You should study about the Dust Bowl. It was in the 1930s. It was an environmental catastrophe. It wiped out, so much of the topsoil of the Midwest just dried up and blew away because of unsustainable farming practices coupled with climate change, or at least a spell of really hot, dry, windy weather. And it caused massive migration, internal migration of Americans. So the Okies and the Arkies all migrated to California and wherever. Could that happen again? Maybe. We'll talk about climate change in a moment. Okay, so these are my four horsemen of the potential apocalypse of the future. I'm not alone in thinking maybe too much about the collapse of civilization. Jared Diamond is a really cool guy. He published a number of different books. I think he started out as an ornithologist and maybe switched to anthropology. I don't know, that might show up here again. Anyway, he's got a couple good books. This is a great one on collapse. And what he did was he said we should learn from history. And we know we have certain problems now. What has happened in the past? Other civilizations have collapsed. Will our civilization go on forever? It would be naive to think so, even though we may hope so. So what are the things we should watch out for? Well, how did the other civilizations collapse? And he said it was for a really limited number of reasons. Here they are. Number one, hostile neighbors. So some civilizations have collapsed because they were simply invaded and taken over. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Will that happen to us? I don't know. How about collapse of essential trading partners? So if your civilization depends upon a certain product or a certain kind of trade with another civilization and it collapses, suddenly you don't have that stuff you need and you collapse. Your civilization collapses. Okay, could that happen to us? Well, you see sort of elements of that when there's economic recession because of the interconnectedness of global trading. Let me give you an example. Japan, for instance, very poor in natural resources in terms of energy supply. They don't have any coal or oil or natural gas, and so they are required either to import fossil fuels or develop their own alternatives, such as nuclear energy or wind or tidal or something like that. Well, what was the name of that earthquake? The big earthquake. Here it is again. Sorry. The tsunami that wiped out the nuclear reactor there has caused kind of a pushback against their development of nuclear energy. They are still highly dependent upon other nations for the supply of energy, fossil fuels. If those stopped for whatever reason, then Japan's economy and civilization would be at risk. Okay, and you can see the same sort of thing at for the United States. Do we depend upon fossil fuels imported? To a certain extent, yes. If they're interrupted, what happens? Probably you've seen the effect at the gas pump. So that is a problem. I mean, that's just oil. There are other things as well. Anyway, so that is an element of the collapse of civilizations. Next one is environmental problems. Well, like what? Well, the Easter Island deforested. It was an island, and they required trees to make canoes and to get around on the water, but they over-harvested all the trees, making their stone statues. I'm oversimplifying what really happened, but they did indeed deforest their island. No more trees, no more boats, no more boats. Their civilization collapsed. So pay attention to environmental problems. Climate change. I will talk about modern climate change, but the climate has also changed in the past. That has led to the collapse of civilizations. Greenland used to have a pretty viable civilization of, I think they were Vikings or something like that. And there was a little ice age that happened. It got cold for a long period of time. They weren't able to adapt to that, and that civilization collapsed. That has happened in other places as well. I think, yeah, so those are really one, two, three, four things. And the fifth is not external, it's more like an internal inability to deal with the issue, the failure to adapt to environmental issues. We're not talking about biological adaptation here, we're talking about social adaptation. So the, those Viking colonies or Norse colonies in Greenland collapsed while the Native Americans who were there continued to hunt seal, and they did just fine. But the local guys, they liked dairy products or something like that. All right, so I'm pretty sketchy on those details, but this is what Diamond says: failure to adapt to environmental issues. So when more versatile, nimble, innovative societies are less likely to collapse when faced with these kind of stressors. Okay, what kind of government does the United States have? Are we nimble and quick to adapt to sudden changes, or is our government paralyzed by tradition and its current politics? I don't know. Okay, so regarding what people do, I said I was talking about the future, two things to think about: what people do, what nature does. Regarding what people do, three scenarios. I've given you the business as usual scenario, the apocalyptic scenario, and now probably what's going to happen is something in between. Will we respond to environmental problems? Probably slowly and painfully, but probably yes. We are already starting to respond to the stress of climate change. Will it be enough? Never. Will it be something? Yes. We'll see. Will we avoid total economic collapse? I have no idea. Will we avoid war? Just don't even think about it. Will we avoid total world devastation war? I hope and pray. Will population growth go down? That's a good question. It may. This whole U.S. Population size thing is really interesting to me because so much of it is dependent on immigration, and as you know, immigration currently is a very thorny political subject. I don't know what's going to go on with that. We shall see. But very interesting to me that reproductive rates, once people get here, settle down and go to near replacement rate, except for me and my wife who had 4 kids. But actually, I did the math. I have siblings who had 0 kids or 1 kid, and when you average it out, as my family, we have less than replacement rate. So there. Okay. Will we avoid annihilation from emerging disease? Who knows? But my God, like I said, you got to love the Center for Disease Control. They got our back as closely as can be done. It is a serious and present threat, the emerging diseases. I would pay attention to that. Okay, so that's Murphy's predictions. I'm sure you could think of many more things to talk about, and probably I should have. But I'm just going to change the subject now to what is coming down the pike from nature. And I have to say, I had to come up with a pretty image for nature, and it's Ecotopia. It's all about redwoods, but frankly, at the end of the semester, I get kind of tired of redwoods. So I just Googled nature, and I saw this beautiful picture, and I just wanted to talk about it for a moment because it has nothing to do with what the future is coming. But look at the color of the water. It's very milky, and assuming that this hasn't been over photoshopped, that means this is a glacial lake. This is probably taken, plus all these conifers, this is taken up north. I'm going to say this is taken in Canada, probably in the Canadian Rockies. The other thing is, I'm an ecologist. So I'm always looking at stuff, and you see this landslide back here, primary succession, disturbance in primary succession, and we have a kind of a mosaic of natural forest types, probably aspen trees that far north, and conifers. And yes, look at all these conifers, and look at this spot right here. Something happened. Why are these trees so young? It looks like they were logged or something, but I see no signs of humans. And wait a minute, that looks like a bridge. And over here, I think there's some people here. I wonder if that was logged. Anyway, that's what happens when you study too much ecology. You start interpreting everything you see through the lens of nature. What will nature do to Ecotopia? Let's see. Here are my 2 worries for Ecotopia: invasive species and climate change. Let's talk about those. Invasive species and climate change. Invasive species. This is a sand dune, and it is covered with an invasive species, European beach grass. Am I worried about European beach grass putting a serious hit on redwoods and Ecotopia? No, I am not, because European beach grass sticks to the beach. It's not a chief concern, but there are lots of invasive species. Not all, as I mentioned earlier, not all introduced species become invasive, but some do. And if you look into the past, you will see that there have been times when invasive species have destroyed entire forests. So I didn't want to scare you, but let you know about it, knowing that it probably will scare you. Hopefully it'll just make you aware of what could happen in the future. So let me tell you the story of the American chestnut. Might be a good time to take a break and then start over again. So I'll wait 3 seconds and then continue so you can take your break. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the story of the American chestnut. So here we are in Appalachia. Now, once upon a time, 1 in 4 trees in this area was of the American chestnut. What was the American chestnut? A great big beautiful tree, a hardwood. Oh my God. I've seen other pictures even bigger. These trees rivaled redwoods in their girth and size. Unlike redwoods, they actually produce some good eating food. Look at these nuts, chestnuts. You've heard of chestnuts. Chestnuts roasting on the open fire, that Christmas song, which none of us eat chestnuts anymore for reasons I'll tell you in a second. Here they are. Looks kind of like chinkapin. In fact, they're relatives. Big fat nuts. Now remember, this whole area, so for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, this forest with chestnuts, each tree producing all these nuts. Who do you think ate the nuts? Native Americans for sure, but also turkeys, bears, deer, chipmunks, squirrels. The amount of wildlife that these trees must have supported kind of boggles the mind. Lewis and Clark, remember them from the early 1800s? I think it was Clark was on his way to a rendezvous with Lewis and the men to go out west. And he came down the Ohio River. I think this is the Ohio River. And as he was going, he saw hundreds and hundreds of squirrels swimming across the river. Why? Have you ever seen squirrels swimming across the river? Not me. Why? Why were there so many squirrels? I don't know the answer. Well, actually, there were probably so many more squirrels than there are now. Well, it's a sad story. This is what happened to the American chestnut. In 1905, a fungus, a Cryphonectria, was introduced, probably from Japan or from Asia. Arrived on nursery stock. So someone dug up some trees. They just happened to be diseased, but they didn't know it. And they came across the seas, and they were planted, and the disease jumped to our chestnut. And within 35 years, they were all gone. All gone. It killed 1 in 4 trees. All the chestnuts, they were gone, at least the tops of them. The roots are still alive, but the bottoms of the trees died. Is that apocalyptic? Yes, it is. So I can't even imagine the ecological impact that must have had on Appalachia. So many factors changed. So the scary thing is, what if something like that would happen to the redwoods? That would be terrible. Could it happen? Oh, I'd love to say no, but it could happen. So maybe you've heard of this disease, sudden oak death. It's a terrible name. Why is it a terrible name? First of all, it's not sudden. It doesn't suddenly kill a tree, or it may be on a tree for many years before the tree suddenly dies. It doesn't just infect oaks, as you will see. It infects a lot of trees. It doesn't always kill. So many of the species infected by it don't die. They just live, they have the disease, and they shed the spores all the time onto everybody else. And this is the name of the organism, Phytophthora ramorum, which ramorum like omnivorous, it eats everything. It's a fungus that has a wide spectrum. So here's the quick story of sudden oak death. It was introduced in, I think, hold on a sec. Oh, yeah, 1994 it was introduced to California in the Monterey area, probably on rhododendron nursery stock, and it is spread by nurseries. And it is spread. It was called sudden oak death because oaks, certain kinds of oaks, are particularly sensitive to it, and so people started noticing them dying. And unfortunately, especially for Native Americans who still gather acorns or would like to gather acorns, it is very bad to live oak. Here it is. The oaks it's particularly bad to, and it's here too. So let me just show you what species does this sudden oak death infect. So if you go to this link, suddenoakdeath.org, which I already have, you go to the California Oak Mortality Task Force. This is a group that is carefully watching Phytophthora ramorum. It's a great link. If you want to stay up to date, watch it. And they have you can read their current newsletter. What I'm interested in first is their official list of host plants, which is maintained by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I have opened that up already, and here's their list of hosts and plants proven or associated with Phytophthora ramorum. Scientific name, Acer macrophyllum, big leaf maple. But of course, is Ecotopia. It's about redwoods. So what's the scientific name of redwoods? Sequoia. Okay, so let's go down to sequoia. Is it here? We hope not. And it's Sequoia sempervirens, coast redwood. This thing can infect coast redwood. That's not good news. That is bad news. Is it terrible news? We don't know yet. We don't know how bad it is on redwoods, how widespread it is. Although it's been, let's see, 1994, 10 years? Only 10 years? No, 20 years since this thing arrived. We're still learning about it. Good news is it hasn't wiped out all the redwoods really quickly. It's not spreading like the chestnut blight is. But where is it? Well, if you go to, the question is, what is the current range of the disease and how far and fast is it spreading? Well, if you go to the news events, the current newsletter, which I have done, you go here. Current California Oak Mortality Task Force newsletter, April 2014. Look at this. Top item, Phytophthora ramorum has been detected in the Mad River watershed of Humboldt County. 5.5 miles southeast of Maple Creek on tan oak, that's it, tan oak, and California bay laurel. And look at this. Here is a map of where they know its locations are. Here it is in the Mad River. Here's the Humboldt Bay area. It's upstream on the Mad River. It's on Redwood Creek. It's up above Redwood National Park, and it's down south all over southern Humboldt County. This is not going to be eradicated. It is too deep into the United States. Basically, we can protect certain areas, but in my opinion, my prediction is it's going to spread and it's going to do what it's going to do. What we know most of all is that tan oak and other relatives of oak are particularly susceptible to it. They will die. And how many of them will die, how widespread that death will be, we will have to find out. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, where was I? Talking about apocalypse, right? Whoops, sorry. Here we are. Worrying about sudden oak death. Invasive species. Okay, so let's see. This is just one invasive species. What humans seem to be doing in the 20th century and 21st century, actually going back to say the 1600s, is we're sort of taking all the species on the planet, which for millions of years have been separated by islands and mountains and deserts, and we move them around. We pick them up and we move them around. And we're just jumbling up everything on the planet, and some of them don't get along very well together, and it causes outbreaks such as chestnut blight and now sudden oak death, and we'll just have to see what happens in the future. So should even if Phytophthora ramorum doesn't move in and kill off all the redwoods, is it possible that something else might? It's possible, but can we predict it for sure? No, it's just something that may happen and makes you lose sleep at night. I'm sorry about that. But I just had to share these stories with you because they've happened before, they may happen again. Okay, so two things that nature I'm concerned about throwing us is number one, invasive species, and the number two, climate change. So what about climate change? You've heard about climate change, and although probably 20 years ago I couldn't assume that, but now I can. Most people have got the basics of climate change down. Here's the simplest of cartoons I could find. The sun warms the planet and keeps us at a certain temperature, but if we hold too much of that temperature in, we warm up. If too much goes away, we cool down. How does it work? Well, normally some sunlight is bounced back into space and doesn't heat us up at all. Some is absorbed, say, by the land and re-radiated back into space, but some is kept behind naturally and kept in by gases in the air like water vapor. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas. If you have some gases are greenhouse gases, that is, they hold in temperature. Others don't. They actually reflect light. So sulfur dioxide, for instance, is a cooling agent. But the more greenhouse gases there are, the more it will warm up. So the extra heat is kept in the air by greenhouse gases produced from human activity. There's some natural activity too that releases greenhouse gases like weathering of limestone and volcanic explosions, true, but also there are humans doing stuff, which you've probably heard about. So here's a greenhouse gas that has been tracked since at least the 1960s, carbon dioxide. And this is great. They've been doing this for a long time, and they noticed that with the seasonal variation, the amount of greenhouse of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up and goes down. But over time, it's been going up and up and up and up. And right now, well, actually, this graph shows it above 380. It's currently at 400. What are those parts per million? Is that a lot? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That was the question. In 1985 or 86, I was a 26. I was 25-year-old student at Humboldt State University. I'd skipped some years. And I saw this graph then. So that was back here. I saw this graph. And they told me about carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect. And I went, "Wah! Apocalypse! We're all going to die. Climate change is upon us. Why don't we do something about it?" Well, we didn't do anything about it, and it's going up and up and up. The reason is it's a very complicated thing to study. It's complicated for scientists to gather enough data from the entire planet and to test all the different hypotheses and to come to a consensus that the evidence states that humans are causing something. That has taken a long time. In the meantime, the issue has also gotten politicized because some people don't want to believe what the scientists are saying. And early on there was some disagreement among the scientists, and so that made the politicians even more divided. But now there's no disagreement among the scientists. That there might be 1% of the scientists are naysayers, but 99% of us are like, okay, this is a real thing. It's caused by humans. If we don't do anything about it, these are some of the possible consequences. That leaves the decision making in the politicians' court. Well, as you know, this has become a politicized issue, and so it's all hard and complicated. But according to, I hope you read in our discussion forum, I think Derek, somebody posted a question about climate change that I gave what I thought was a thoughtful response, though I think I scared everybody away because I don't know why no one replied. But basically, if you are confused about climate change, you need to decide who you're going to believe. And for my money, I believe the scientists. I believe the large associations of specialists. For instance, the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN panel of climate scientists, or the American Research Council, United States Research Council, I think, is an American panel that has made recommendations about climate change. So they're as authoritative as you can get as far as I'm concerned. Other people have other sources of authority. This is all part of critical thinking. How do you decide what you believe in? And so for me, I go with the scientists, and they're saying climate change is going to be pretty serious, and they're making specific predictions that relate to us here in Ecotopia. So what are they? Oops. Is it real? Is it caused by humans? I just wanted to, these are sort of the stages that we went through in understanding climate change. First, is it real? Because we didn't know that. Secondly, well, if it's happening, is it caused by humans or is it natural? Those hypotheses needed to be tested. And we've had what's called a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is when most people believe something and then they shift to believing something different. And this has happened many times in human history. For one, the idea of the Earth going around the sun versus the sun going around the Earth was a Galilean idea, and it caused a paradigm shift a long time ago. I forget when. When was another paradigm shift? Evolution. When Darwin and Wallace suggested that species change over time due to evolution and the mechanisms they proposed, no one believed them at first. There was a lot of argument. Over time, there's a paradigm shift that people now accept, scientists now accept that evolution occurs. Continental drift, which I've taught as fact in this class, was dismissed by geologists until about the 1970s. Then a bunch of different evidence came together that supported it, and people had to change the way they thought about it. Climate change has done the same thing. There was a time when most of us did not believe that humans could possibly do anything so big as to affect the climate. It's just too big. But that has changed. Now there has been a paradigm shift, and we do, mostly. Okay, you might, I'm actually going to skip this now. If you want to, just Google Environmental Protection Agency climate change, and they have predictions on what's going to happen regarding climate change. Do we have to worry about it? Let's see. Here are some local concerns they say we need to be concerned about. Well, actually, here in Ecotopia, along the coast, we are pretty well buffered from many of the worst effects of climate change. We don't get hurricanes here, but areas like Florida and New Orleans that get hurricanes are going to become more frequent and more powerful. That's a prediction from the climate change scientists. It's possible that a tropical cyclone could come up here and hammer the coast. It just rarely happens. The changes in temperature are greater the farther north you go. So in Alaska, they're having in the Arctic and subarctic, they're having really huge changes right now because the temperature is changing much faster there than it is farther south. Also, we live near the Pacific Ocean with the upwelling zone that keeps us fairly cool. So some of the extreme heat waves that are predicted associated with climate change may not affect us as much as it will elsewhere. But what they do say is that in California there will be less snow in the mountains. Now, snow acts as a water reservoir, and as it melts slowly in springtime, it releases that water slowly so that the springs and the groundwater stay high later in the year. But with less snow than when the precipitation falls, there will be less water runoff in spring and summer, and so our summer river levels can be predicted to be lower, which is not really good news for us since our summer river levels are already pretty low. We will get more rain in winter, and sometimes that rain will come in large flood events, so we can expect that as well. Higher temperatures, as I mentioned, probably inland. Here on the coast, maybe, but maybe not so bad as other places. Less summertime fog, that could be a severe hit for the redwoods, and that's predicted to occur in the southern range of the redwoods. So we could have range contraction of this poor redwood, which for millions of years has been widespread across the northern hemisphere, and now is only along this narrow strip that is getting narrower. Will we introduce redwoods farther north? Maybe. I hope so. I think that would be a good idea. Changes in species composition, there's so much we don't know. There are so many species out there. Many of them can respond to climate change by flying away or swimming away or walking away. Others are stuck where they are. And some of those things that are stuck may go extinct because they can't move fast enough to adjust to changes in climate. Sea level rise. I wanted to talk especially about sea level rise. That's predicted to happen, and of course that affects everywhere that has a coastline, and we have coastlines. So one of the really interesting studies was done in 2013 by this fellow local named Alderon Laird. And what he did was he very carefully mapped out the boundaries of Humboldt Bay, assessing the various levees and dikes and places that hold water back. And he, let's see, I've put a link here. I'm not going to go to it now, but if you wanted to find it, the HumboldtBaykeeper.org has his report there. What this shows, you see these different colored lines. The red line would be a levee, which will be overtopped by 3 foot of that says 3 foot. I'm not. I think that is 3 feet. 3 feet of. Usually we talk about meters, but he was reporting feet. 3 feet of sea level rise. So only a rise of 3 feet, and all this stuff is going to have water spilling over it. That's a lot of it. And this shaded area, the blue shading, is the 1870 tidal inundation. So it used to be that when the high tide came up, this whole area would flood, suggesting that if this stuff floods, the water is going to come up this far and maybe even farther because the sea level has risen. And then yellow line is the rest of it. It's if it will go, if it goes up to 6 feet. So basically what it's showing is that sea level rise, which no one really knows how much it's going to rise. There's various predictions, but we really don't know what's going to happen with some of the big ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica. It could be quite a bit. And so look, if this place gets overtopped, I'm not sure, he doesn't have blue shading here. I'm not quite sure what happens to all this bottomland. Here is a picture of Tuluwat Island with a pretty high king tide, almost a 9-foot tide in 2010. The island is almost entirely underwater. If you raise the sea level up a few feet, this whole thing is going to get flooded by water. What a shame. So 150 years ago, the poor Wiyats were massacred at this spot. 150 years ago, they were finally given the land back, and now it's being threatened to be lost again by sea level rise. So it's something to be concerned about. Lastly, I wanted to talk about synergistic effects. What that means is the interaction of multiple elements in a system to produce an effect different from or greater than the sum of their individual effects. So for instance, something happens here, it also affects something here. Together we get a big effect. So here's an example. What happens if marijuana is legalized in Humboldt County? One of my favorite things to do on Google Earth is go look for marijuana grows. Let's do that first, and then I'll come back to some synergistic effects that might happen. So here we go. Let's see. We are in, let's make this big. We are in HSU Redwood Bowl. Okay, here's Redwood, the football field, and all these buildings at HSU complex. And let's just go hunting for marijuana grows. It's fun to do. Here's one, not too far away from where we live. If you zoom in, look at these greenhouses. 1, 2, 3, 4 greenhouses. There's actually a bunch of them all around here, plus a trash pit. And these are carved out of the hillsides, and they require water, so the water's coming from somewhere. I wonder where. And here's grow number 2. A little farther to the south, not too far from Ruth Lake, I think. And here we go. There's more here. A whole complex. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go to another one. There we go. Right, so here's a nice greenhouse area, kind of low resolution. I could be wrong. Maybe they're growing tomatoes or something, but they're holding back the water too in a place that is pretty dry. And so that means that's water that's not making its way into the groundwater and not recharging the springs and not getting down into the rivers. Here's grow number 4, farther south. This one's actually Mendocino County, not far from Willits. And check this out on the hillside. I had a little greenhouse, all these little, I don't think those are apple trees, folks. And here you can see a reservoir, and it's green with algae because it's receiving too many nutrients. It's eutrophic. And maybe it's not because these guys are withholding water or their nutrients they're using to fertilize are making a way into the water, but maybe it's because these guys are. Or maybe it's because it's these guys are. Here's another greenhouse. Here's another one. Here's another one. All throughout the watershed, you can see grow after grow after grow. So what happens if legalization happens? There's a number of different possibilities. It's a very favorite topic of conversation around here. I would suggest that the market is going to collapse for this stuff. I think, whoops, you're not supposed to see that. There's my Google Earth tour. Effect on our society of legalization. If it's true that you couldn't continue, I don't think you can compete against Monsanto and Arthur Daniels Midland to supply the market with marijuana. I think it's going to be taken over. So if it's no longer so profitable, people aren't going to be living out in the woods anymore growing pot. So we're going to have a reduced population size, not only in the rural areas, but also maybe here in town as people realize the money's not here anymore, the shops close down and they move out. Less tax revenue for the county. A lot of income from marijuana comes into our county and then is paid back, is collected through taxes. A lot of it isn't taxed, but many people are laundering their money and paying taxes on it. And when that's gone, that's going to be bad for public services. Maybe an increased poverty rate. But what about nature? Nature will probably recover when those grows are abandoned, and all that water is no longer going to be diverted, should return back into the rivers, and all those nutrients that may be seeping into the soil and into the watersheds will no longer be delivered. So we could see improvements in watershed conditions, and there may be fewer people, fewer impacts overall. Just an example of synergistic effects that may happen in the future. Okay, here's another example. Well, if we are buffered from climate change, what if climate change is very negative elsewhere? The whole national and world economy could suffer, and will we be affected by that? Yes, in hard to predict ways. We could get reduced revenue from the state, from California or from the United States here in Ecotopia. So the freeway, for instance, the levees, those are paid for very much by state funds, not locally. And if that revenue reduces, then locally, economically, we're going to have harder times. For instance, we will be unable to reinforce the levees around the bay. If immigration continues in the United States, internal immigration. If there's some dust bowl-like scenario, maybe Albuquerque and Los Angeles, they decide it's just too bloody hot and there's not enough water down there, we need to move. Where are they going to go? They may come here. What would that happen? Will that happen? I don't know. It's just a scenario. It could happen. Climate change is affecting the oceans. We get a lot of our society depends upon salmon and crabs, and if those economies collapse, it's bad for our economy and it's bad for our society. So we hope that doesn't happen, but it could. So I've gone on and on. Thank you for listening. I'm almost done. I just have a summary. A reminder, I can't predict the future. I could be wrong about all this. Probably the future is going to be something entirely different from what I haven't predicted here. But one thing I want to say is there probably is no such thing as an ecotopia. It's been my dirty little secret this whole semester. No such thing as an ecotopia. What is an ecotopia? Well, a utopia is a perfect society. So I guess an ecotopia would be a perfect society living with nature, which could work if nature never changed and we figured out how to live within it. But we change and nature changes. And so I don't think we'll ever come up with a perfect society to live in Redwood Country. Oh well, but what we can do is muddle our way through as best as we can. In order to help you do that, I only have two recommendations. They are minor. The first is to read the newspapers. Stay informed. Know what's coming. Be prepared for it. Read the newspaper. A good one. They're hard to find. I like the New York Times. even though it's from the east. Number two is go outside and pay attention. You know, throughout this entire course, I've encouraged you to pay attention to nature, to take your temperature readings, watch the sun, look for signs of the change of the seasons, to go out into the forest and see what's happening. It's a faith I have that if humans are more physically connected to nature, that they will better be able to live with it. So, hope I haven't scared you too much. Hope you muddle through it as well as can be muddled through. Thanks. See you later. Bye. Too long.